Thomas Kincaid Jones hated the little Colorado town of Raven Springs on sight. He was a city man from Chicago. He liked the music of traffic, the horns, the eternal movement around him. Here there was nothing to see, not much to do. Raven Springs, just a few miles out of Benton, Colorado, where he was temporarily assigned on a case, was the end of the world. It was a little town in northwestern Colorado surrounded by majestic snow-covered mountains, with a small and tight-knit population that seemed to disdain any stranger. The holiday season had apparently been kicked off even before Thanksgiving, because the town was decked out in lights and Christmas decorations in the store windows, and Christmas was at least 3 weeks away. He hated Christmas. It was a cold Christmas morning in Chicago when the woman he loved told him that she'd met somebody else and fallen in love, really in love, and that she was leaving him. He'd tried to talk her out of it. They'd been in an on-off relationship for months, and he'd been on the verge of proposing. He knew she dated other men, but he'd been fairly certain that there was no real competition. Well, not until that morning, when she'd hit him in the gut with her confession. Maybe it hadn't been love as much as physical attraction that held them together, but he'd felt lost when she left town. He decided then and there that he wouldn't ever let another woman get that close to him. 6 years ago, that had happened, and while he'd had infrequent liaisons, he'd never loved any of them. If a woman could think of men as disposable, surely it was fair play for a man to consider them disposable. He was still bitter about Angie taking off with another man, especially when he'd considered marriage for the first time in his life. Just before she left, there had been one last parting shot. She didn't really want to spend her life with a man in law enforcement who could be killed any time he went out on a case. She hated guns. He'd thought she was just using that as an excuse. Probably she had. She'd never acted like she cared. He'd had a job, his service with the Chicago Police Department, and he'd been in Army intelligence while he was in the service, in between law enforcement positions. Any man could be killed by a car crash, a riot, a flaming meteor hitting the ground. Law enforcement had its risks, but so did life itself. He didn't dwell on that, anyway. He was a good shot, and he had a solid background, starting at his service with the Chicago Police Department right out of school. He'd wanted something more adventurous, though, so even before Angie left him, he'd applied for a job with the Bureau. After months of checking and rechecking, they'd hired him. He'd had physical encounters with criminals, of course. One memorable one was right outside the local FBI office, 2 guys trying to kill each other over a girl. He'd stepped in, without thinking about it, and separated them. His reward had been a knife slashing into his chest. He'd subdued the suspect and called for backup, bleeding all the while. One of the local police officers, a man he knew, insisted that he go to the emergency room for treatment. He still had the scar. It wasn't too noticeable in the thick hair that covered the solid muscle of his chest, but it was long and deep. He was a big guy, over 6 feet, not fat but husky and broad-shouldered, like a wrestler. He had thick black hair and large hands. His eyes were dark and piercing, and he almost never smiled. They'd called him Stoneface back in Chicago. Not in front of him, though. Not ever. He was bored out of his mind. He was here on a case for the FBI. It was a federal crime, kidnapping, and he was partnering with local law enforcement to apprehend the perpetrator who'd left his heavily bound hostage, a young woman, to freeze to death in a lonely, unheated mountain cabin.